It's Be Lifted Up, your guide to living an abundant life. I am DC Marshall, and he is Alfred Edmond Jr. Hey there, Alfred.
Hey, D. It's good to be riding with you again.
And this is a show about faith and finances. And if you've been listening for some time, you know for a long time now, we've had some amazing guests come on and talk to us about things that are really close to our hearts in terms of how we do well and increase in the areas of spiritual wellness and increase in the area of financial wellness. And so on today's show, we have a really awesome guest again. And I'm looking forward to our guest today. Do you know? Well, you know what? I won't spoil it, Alfred, but I'm sure you know our guest, or you've had some history.
Yeah, yes. We're fellow New York journalists. It's been a really, really, really long time since I've seen her. Seen her face to face. Obviously, she's someone I've seen regularly because she is an Emmy Award winning television journalist on Spectrum One News New York, Spectrum News New York 1. So if you're a New Yorker, you know our guest. We'll save her to introduce her during the next segment, but a very exciting guest. Very blessed to have her on the show. She has a great new book that really is relevant to our audience as a faith community. And so I'm really, really excited about not only the book, but our guests. If you're listening to Be Lifted Up, your guide to living an abundant life, we're going to be talking, I'll give you a hint. We're going to be talking about the question of what's behind the development of gospel music. And gospel music is aspect of faith is very close to my heart for a lot of reasons. So listen, Be Lifted Up, your guide to living an abundant life. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
And we're back. It's Be Lifted Up, your guide to living an abundant life. And on this show, we are talking about what's behind the development of gospel music. And today, specifically, we're talking about women who changed gospel music. We know there are a lot of really, I'm going to say, women in gospel music who are really showing up with really big brands and really hot music. And, they're all over IG and they are hosting radio shows and such. But on this show, we really want to look at, but who are the women who really changed the game? And so we have a guest today who we're going to bring in just a minute. But Alfred, these stats are really interesting. And what we have learned in preparing for today's show is U.S. record music revenue recently reached a retail value of $12.2 billion in 2020, which is so interesting because it's the pandemic. Okay, so hold on, right? But $12.2 billion in 2020, 90% of that was digital sales. Okay, so we're just level setting everybody for this conversation on women who changed gospel music. And we're looking at, gospel music and where it is today. So this 90% of digital sales, it comes from streaming and subscriptions and downloads versus 10% of physical product sales. So Alfred, I guess that means physical product, would that have been like 45s and records and CDs and such?
Well, in 2020, it's probably CDs. I can't imagine it being a technology any less than that. But yeah, that's why it's so little. Most of us are not buying physical products to listen to music anymore. But I would imagine you're talking about CDs.
Well, that's what I mean. I think those are some of the stats that were shared with. It's like 10% is physical product. I was really just being it was really just a side eye, like 45s, and just to see if you were paying attention. We definitely.
I thought it was a dig that I'm a little bit older than you are. So.
I wasn't gonna tell anybody.
I'm like your big brother. And
I was not gonna say it. But look, gospel music really gets swept into a broad category of religious music. So I think, our guests will hopefully share some insight there. But also we found that approximately 3.2% of all music consumed was, air quotes, religious, among whom were some of our favorite gospel songs by artists like CeCe Winans, which they got a rebrand and they got a bump up with that Verses, as well well as Tasha Cobbs-Leonard, Corinne Hathorn, Ricky Dillard, which I think he just won an award. BB Winans, I think he too definitely was a star of a show recently that was with the Versus. Did you see that, Alfred?
Did not see that Versus.
Oh my goodness!
Sorry, I missed it.
You should. I don't know how you go back and see that.
I think there's a way to go back and see it. I need to check it out, especially if you're raving, because you don't waste your time on. I
think you would enjoy it.
Okay.
I think you would enjoy and appreciate it. Because you know why? I think you'll get into, even from a business perspective, like, I think you're going to lean in like, what is happening here? This is really interesting. Versus number one, but number two, but even like faith and gospel and the whole big stage, you know, Tabitha Brown was there and Mary was there. But in any event, what we're talking about is really—
Let's not forget Tamala Mann, because we had her and David on the show.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Just a couple of episodes ago. So we're going to give love to David and Tamala. But yeah. I mean, you're talking about some of the iconic names in gospel and contemporary gospel in particular. It is an important topic to me because gospel as an industry is a very interesting story, separate and apart from Black music as an industry as a whole, especially when you look at how gospel has helped drive historically blues, R&B. You know, a lot of the greatest singers that we know came out of gospel music. But it's the other thing, which is that for me personally, and we talk about how we were all impacted by that pandemic, though I was raised on gospel music, I came out of the church, grandson of a Baptist minister. I got a whole branch of my family, the Edmund cousins, that are very known in Central Jersey as this child. My uncle organized them to like the Jackson 5 of gospel singers growing up. A couple of my cousins still sing professionally as a result of that. So it's something that's near and dear to my heart personally. And now, you know, even though I'm into bodybuilding, my main music of choice when I work out is Kirk Franklin and interesting. The contemporary, upbeat contemporary gospel, but it's feeding the spirit while I'm building my body. And so this whole gospel music conversation has a deep meaning for me from a business standpoint, as well as a personal and spiritual standpoint. So yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah. Well, let's go to the history and then we're going to bring in our guests. So let's just talk about history because we, sort of wanted to level set in terms of where we are now. But historically, gospel music, what we should remember is our most celebrated gospel pioneers include Thomas Dorsey, known as the father of gospel, Mahalia Jackson, known as the queen of gospel, James Cleveland, known as the king of gospel. And, really the golden age of gospel was also filled with pioneering women who we may not know about, but those who really made a difference on the road to abundance. Women who really carved out their own paths and planted roots for other people to reap the harvest, like the names that we know now. But they were change agents who left a legacy that often rivaled the music. And so right now, today, we're going to have a conversation because in her new book, Isn't Her Grace Amazing? The Women Who Change Gospel Music. Our guest today, Cheryl Wills, highlights women in the gospel industry who often go unnoticed and underappreciated for their talents, including they were writers, they were arrangers, they were directing, they were developing singers, as well as those who have left an indelible mark on the industry. Notable names include Queen Mothers, Sisters in Song. I'm not going to go through the list now because I want to bring in Cheryl. So Cheryl, will you please join us? Come to center stage, the microphone, round of applause. The crowd goes wild. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the show.
Oh, it's so good to see you, Dee and Alfred. What an honor to share the same space with you and all of your amazing listeners with Be Lifted Up. I am so grateful for this opportunity. I really am.
Cheryl, again, because I'm a New Yorker, I see you more than you see me. I can guarantee that. But in your own right, and I'm so glad, we're talking about, this book is about great journalism in addition to the story that we're telling, that you're telling. But you are an Emmy Award winning journalist for Spectrum News, New York One, the first African-American woman to host a primetime nightly newscast for the cable network. You anchor the Emmy nominated broadcast Live at 10 on weeknights. And, you do it all. And we are just so glad about how you represent as a Black woman, as a journalist, because that means something to me. And, we can do a whole nother show about the state of our profession these days. But I just want our audience to know that the person writing this book is the right person to write this book.
Thank you.
I deeply appreciate you.
Thank you,
talk about, we'll talk about your, a little bit about your career, but talk about what led you to this project.
I appreciate everything you said. And you make an excellent point when you said this is the right person to write this book, because here's the reality, Alfred. A lot of people write our stories who don't know our stories, who haven't lived our stories. I heard you say you were the grandson of a minister. So was I. I was the granddaughter of 2 ministers. Both of my grandfathers were ministers. I got a double dose. And so I grew up with gospel music. It was my breast milk, if you will, being in church with my family and listening to all of these dynamic artists literally make a way out of no way. So it is really my honor to amplify their careers, because here's what I know for sure. So many of the people in my book, when they died, their legacies died with them. That doesn't sit well with me. I know it doesn't sit well with you either, Alfred and Dee, because when I post things on my social media, I'll say things about Rosetta Tharpe or Sally Martin. I get back in my DMs, who were they? That's unacceptable. And you know whose fault that is? Ours. We have to tell their stories. And so that's what I do in this book. Isn't Her Grace amazing? Amplifying the stories of amazing women who made a mark in gospel music.
All right. And that said, we will be right back. It's Be Lifted Up, your guide to living an abundant life.
We're here with Be Lifted Up, your guide to living an abundant life. I'm so excited. I know Dee is too, for our guest today and the subject matter we're talking about. We're here with Cheryl Wills, Emmy Award winning news anchor, the Spectrum New York One, but more importantly, the author of a new book about women in gospel. Isn't Her Grace amazing? The women who changed gospel music. We're going to get into obviously the legacy in terms of the impact on the music industry and the impact on Black people, and these untold stories that need to be told. But I want to start out with really my memories of and so a lot of the classic gospel that I'm deep into Kirk Franklin and the more contemporary gospel, but I still remember just being a child in my mother's kitchen, and she's listening to gospel on the radio and Mahalia Jackson and James Cleveland and those songs, and not just listening. Again, I, like most people, I listen to a lot of secular music. I got 1,000 songs on my iTunes. Okay. Yeah. But there's that impact that I still remember as a child about how that music used to carry my mother through just difficult times, and you could see her drawing strength from that as she was in my family, a divorced single mother and a working, working poor mother, working in a working class community with 4 children that she was trying to bring through, and knew she couldn't do it without the Lord, and made sure we understand that we wouldn't get without the Lord. And so even when the recent documentary, I think there may have been more than one, but I know I watched one on Mahalia Jackson. Yeah. I was watching it for, yes, this is a great story, but it immediately brought back to my spirit, like to the point of tears, that this is the music that brought so many generations of us through, as you say, when there was no way. It seemed that there was no way, and it got us through. So I have to imagine that your work on this project really was a spiritual experience for you.
Alfred, you hit the nail on the head. I teared up listening to you say those things, because the same thing happened to me when I was writing it. I thought about both of my grandmothers scrubbing toilets and having gospel music to get them through. And Opal and Sally, my grandmothers, scrubbed toilets, but because of their dignity in their work, I now sit on an anchor desk every night. And it was because of the praying women and the praying men. Nothing against men, of course, but the praying women, the women that I write about in this book, who would bear down when the going got tough. And they would sing, like you said, a song by Mahalia Jackson, How I Got Over. They would sing a song by Rosetta Tharpe. They would sing songs by Willie Mae Ford Smith. When women sang, nothing against our beautiful brothers, but when women sang, Alfred, they would change the air in the room because they faced so many obstacles, much like women today. You have so many fights. Forget racism. You got to fight all the isms within your own community. And when I was researching this book, some of them told me how they were seen as novelty acts during the golden days of gospel music. They might have Mahalia as one act, but then 10 acts of men. So the women were sort of like, okay, we're going to take a break now. Let the women sing, and that wasn't cool with the women, but they did what they had to do to get to where they needed to be. So you are so right. This is music. Gospel means good news, right? We learned that in Sunday school. And this is the good news of women who used their voice to make a difference in this world.
Cheryl, I may have overlooked this, but what inspired you to say this? I'm thinking, Cheryl, is this her journalist lens, or is she a musician, or is it just a desire to really hold up our ancestors? I think that's part of my question. And so when we come back from the break, I'd love to hear the inspiration behind the book and from which lens you wrote. So we'll be right back, everybody. It's Be Lifted Up, your guide to living an abundant life.
The inspiration, Dee, was my grandmother. It was really all of the above that you mentioned, but first and foremost, I would sit next to the piano with my grandmother. My grandmother was the prayer band leader, the choir director, the missionary. She was the first lady of a little storefront church here in New York City. And I was her first grandchild. So you could just see me squeezing next to my favorite grandma on the piano stool. And my grandmother was an incredible singer. Her name was Opal Wills. And she had an alto voice that would rip the roof off of that little dusty church. Do you hear what I'm saying? I would see people catch the Holy Ghost. Now, I'm a little kid looking at, but it was the power of how my grandmother sang. And then Saturday nights when we were getting ready for church, she would press my hair and we would listen to Inez Andrews, Albertina Walker, Shirley Caesar. And I'd be like, oh, they sing just like grandma. But actually, grandma was singing like them. So that was the inspiration. First and foremost, my singing grandmother who left us in body, but not in spirit in 2019. And I dedicate the book to her, Dee, because I did, like I said, my number one reason was because these women, their legacies are buried with them. That is unacceptable. When my grandmother left us, I said, I'll spend the rest of my life making sure people know who Opal Wills was. Don't we all feel like that about our grandparents? It's up to us to keep their legacies alive. So when I started doing the work, this was a natural fit all the way around. I listened to every woman in this book. No one's a stranger to me.
Wow. So let me just say, I am so, I feel very proud for you because you're a leader who is responsible with your seat. And Alfred mentioned something before. And what I mean by that is, one, that you use your voice and your platform, your access and your resource to hold up the community, right? So that's one thing that's sort of playing out for me in terms of who you are. But the other is, one of my mentors, Dr. Barbara Skinner Williams, would say, we're really responsible or going to be held accountable for our seat.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Get to the gate. And I had a conversation with some corporate women about how some of the seasoned women were starting to retire, and we really needed to capture some of their legacy in the form of their lessons. And I started talking to them about, we really need to get together and write a book in terms of capturing their lessons, their wisdom, their best practices, and put it into something so that we can hold them up and leave something behind. And you did that. That is exactly what you did as a leader and as a journalist, and I have so much more respect for you, just kind of processing that, to hear you talk and just your spirit and your energy. So I just really want to thank you for doing it for us. This is part of, our history. We're having a lot of conversations since the diversity tipping point in the last 2 years about our stories and, our ancestors and paved the way, and we need stories. I interviewed Bryant McBride and Kimberly Davis from the National Hockey League just last week, and they were talking about the first, Black hockey player. And I feel like you, along with people like Kim and Bryant McBride, are such gems to our community. So thank you. Thank you.
Oh, no, thank you for saying that. That means a lot. And Dee, you and Alfred are doing the work as well, giving us a platform. So I salute both of you. Be Lifted Up Radio is all that, okay?
Okay, give it that. Listen, we're about to move into our next break. We're here with Cheryl Wills, who has her great new book that's actually receiving rave response. Isn't Her Grace Amazing? The Women Who Changed Gospel Music. Listening to Be Lifted Up, your guide to living an abundant life. We'll be right back.
And we're back. It's Be Lifted Up. We're here with Cheryl Wills, and we're talking about the brand new book. And you know what I thought, Cheryl, before we were going to the break? And I always come up, or sometimes I come up with ideas about, how do we amplify this work? And I feel like your book, because it's history.
Yes, it is.
Get this in schools. Do you know where I'm going with this? What get this in schools? Because I feel like, this is now a new normal, and normalizing us telling our history. And it's not necessarily just Black history. This is American history, right? We know that there's a special sentiment for Black people because it's Black people, but we're talking about American history when we talk about music and we talk about people who paved the way. So I'm wondering about your book, and it's getting rave reviews, but any conversation about how this goes into K through 12? Is this a place, is there a talk or a tour that needs to be happening at the museums? Like, I think there's something happening in Nashville with the Music Museum, something in Detroit with like a Motown something. And I just feel like your contribution, there's even more to help us in this season of where we are really open to telling our stories and having the world line up.
Yeah, that's a great question. And you know what, Dee? There is a war going on right now on telling Black stories in schools. And I know because I'm also the great-great-great-granddaughter of a Civil War soldier. And my books about that Civil War soldier are in schools. And I remember what we had to go through to get that book in schools. And so that is something that we all need to raise an eyebrow over. Why is it so hard to get our stories mandatory reading in public schools across this country? What's going on with the censorship? And I got news for you. A lot of people have ignored, this book is by a major publisher, HarperCollins, Amistad. And I am kind of stunned by how people have kind of turned their nose up at it, and I'm like, wow, now I understand. It's almost like, oh, most of them are dead, who cares? And that's why it is so critical for us to defend those who can no longer defend their legacies. And I will stand by pushing for this book to get in colleges and schools for the rest of my life, because it is a slap in the face to Mahalia Jackson, who risked her career
Yes.
and support. People think that was easy for her to do. In the 50s and 60s, when you said, I think something's wrong with Jim Crow, that was the end of you. Okay. And when Mahalia Jackson told Martin Luther King, I don't care what happens, I'm a ride or die with you. He was so touched. He said, I want Mahalia to open everything I'm doing. March on Washington. He even said, I want her to sing at my funeral, because he didn't have a lot of people that were willing to risk it all. So Mahalia Jackson was a woman of tremendous integrity, as the 25 women in this book. And it was hard to select 25 out of so many. But for these women, there was a criteria that they all had to meet. And they had risked so much, especially those who sang when segregation was still the law of the land. So I'm going to push for this book to get in schools. And I'm so glad you made that point. And I'm going to keep pushing for this to be a bestseller. These women deserve it. I'm asking for our people to support the stories of these women. Our people. Show that you love them. You don't get rich selling books, okay? This is not about me I have a full-time job. This book tells their story, and I know Mahalia Jackson, Rosetta Tharpe, all of them, Inez Andrews, they're proud that someone remembered them. So many of these women, Dee, and I'll stop with, so many of them traveled all over the world, did incredible things, broke down barriers, gender and race. And now you walk down the street. I could ask 1,000 people in New York City, have you ever heard of fill in the blank? They'll be like, who's that? Unacceptable. And that's why this book should be in every school in America.
So we know about the challenges of getting books in schools, in the public school system. But I want to make sure our audience knows that we're not off the hook, okay?
Yeah.
If you're a church and you're a choir, every member of your choir should have a copy of this book. If you're at HBCU, and we all know about the connection between great singers and the choirs at HBCUs, you should not be a student at a HBCU, and certainly not someone who sings for HBCU who has not read a copy of this book. In other words, there are systemic barriers that we got to deal with in things like public schools. And we can do a whole nother show on what public schools will allow you to do in terms of educating our children. But we have other platforms that are natural platforms, including this show that says, hey, I'll buy it. This is the Christmas gift. This is the birthday gift. This is the graduation gift for anybody, even if you don't sing gospel. Because the gospel is the jumping off point, not only for the careers of people in other, we think of Aretha Franklin as an obvious example, but for how music became produced and sung. The whole OJ's catalog is R&B over gospel. Sounds, and so we, the Be Lifted Up audience, radio audience, we need to do what we need to do. To buy the books, to encourage other people to buy the books, and to tell this story, so that by the time public schools get to it, they're behind the parade. They're like, well, because they're reading it anyway. They're reading it anyway. And
very quickly, when I profiled one group, the Davis sisters of Philadelphia. They're known as the hard-charging sisters. They used to sing old school Holy Ghost and make you shout and everything. And when I reached out to the family, they were like, oh my gosh, someone's remembering our mothers and aunts who sang. And I'm like, exactly. No one's talked about the Davis sisters. No one. They were from Philadelphia, traveled the world singing to the glory of God. So many people have forgotten these women in particular. And I do point out the women because they had to fight harder to get on the mic. They had to fight harder to get their name, as top billing at a concert. They did. And when I see the lukewarm reception to the book, I'm like, well, look here. Wow, people are still dissing them even in death. But, it's up to us to say, you are not going to relegate them to second-class singers. They were A-listers, and it's, like I said, it's on us to put that crown on their heads. They did not want to be forgotten. They did not want to be forgotten. And they sang with everything they had, not because they had nothing else to do, but because they wanted to leave a mark in this world. And that's what this book is. It's saying to them, job well done.
I love your passion, Cheryl. But you know what? I'm going to say I'm hopeful. And although it's challenging to get our folks to purchase books, and it sounds like it's been challenging in terms of the reception. I think one part of it is really because of just us investing in books. I think so. Some of that has to do with that versus the content. But I do think it's normalizing books, but perhaps books in terms of content or history that needs to be told and downloaded. And now we're in a window of opportunity to push for some standard. It's almost like that encyclopedia collection that our purchased. It's like, well, if we had to recreate an encyclopedia for the country, because now Black people are on brand and everybody wants to know, or at least they did for the first 2 years. But wouldn't it be amazing to put together a new encyclopedia collection, but it's a collection of the 10 or 20 or so books in different genres and categories, whether it's music and entertainment. By the way, not just musicians should read the book, it's entertainers. So every program it should be baseline reading. In American, in K through 12, in history class, come on somebody,
come on.
Orders. And then when corporate wants to now hire us to speak about Juneteenth, well, look, we're gonna do you one better. We have a whole collection of how we're gonna educate you, and it's not gonna be on red juice, red punch. God rest the souls of our ancestors. But here's what we're gonna do to level up, okay? Here's what we're gonna talk about. We're gonna talk about these 5 themes or these 7 themes this year, and then for the rest of the year, because Juneteenth is not just a day and it's not just a month, but we're going to talk about it. And here's our core curriculum. And so I really, I get super passionate about other people's passion and amplifying it. And because I'm a businesswoman, I'm a woman of faith, I believe, listen, with man, it's impossible, but God says nothing is impossible and too hard for me. So I'm believing that the same way you got the major book deal, some allies could come along. Listen, allies and advocates, y'all listening? You could go to corporate and say, listen, this is sustainability, it's ESG. Y'all could write a check and we're gonna buy these books and then hand it out to corporate, hand it out to all the white folks, okay? For Juneteenth, since y'all wanna do something, we like it, okay? We're gonna talk about American history. And so we have to go to break, everybody. I'm way over. Stay right there. We will come right back. This is Be Lifted Up, your guide to living an abundant life. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to Be Lifted Up, your guide to living an abundant life. I'm here with my partner, my ride or live, not ride or die, ride and live, partner DC Marshall. And we're here with Emmy Award winning journalist Cheryl Wills talking about her new book, Isn't Her Grace Amazing? The Women Who Changed Gospel Music. And Cheryl, you see, first of all, you came in excited and passionate, and that's all you need. You're the D and I are nothing but sticks of dynamite waiting for somebody to light us up. So
that's right.
We're blowing up. But one of the things I love about the book, and with all that we've said about people forgetting about the Albertina Walkers, and they kind of remember Mahalia now because we had a couple of docs in the last couple of years. But you also do a great job, which I think is very important for any book or piece of content that is about our legacy, of connecting it to the present.
Yes.
And so, I want you to kind of go through the sections of the book, or I kind of will, and you can talk about why you structured it that way. But you go from Queen Mothers, to Sisters in Song, to Architects of the Melody, which is understand that they weren't just singing it, they were creating
That's right.
crossover queens like Aretha Franklin, Mavis Staples, a favorite of mine. But then we got today. This is not a dead art. Pamela Mann. Of course, the great Yolanda Adams, who Black was just honored with our Legacy Award at the Women of Power Summit this past year. Who I rock to at the gym every day, So just talk to me about that. This is not about, just what my grandmother listened to. This is now. This is a book and an art and a craft and artists who are happening right now.
Absolutely. And our music form, gospel, is a living music based on a living gospel, based on a living Jesus Christ, right?
Yes.
So there's nothing dead about this at all. So the music has to reflect that. So we had a challenge, Alfred, of how do we categorize these women when you finally have the 25, which was so hard to do because we could have made it a list of 100, but we had to scale it down. And it's like, okay, who do we put in each category? So we were very proud of how we categorized all of these. And the Queen Mothers, I think, is the most important. You know, Mahalia Jackson has to top any list, the greatest of all time. But you know, who's after Mahalia? It's in line with how you and Dee open this show. And it's a woman who has widely been forgotten. Her name was Sally Martin. She is known as the mother of gospel music. I heard one of you talk about Thomas Dorsey, the father of gospel music. By his side was a woman named Sally Martin. I also heard, I love your show, okay? And I even love everything you said with this in this hour. And you talked about finances and you talked about the business of gospel. Well, guess what? Sally Martin in 1940 started her own publishing company. Think about what was happening in 1940. That's why I'm so proud of this book. In 1940, you had to go through a colored only door. Women were treated as less than nothing. You couldn't vote. You couldn't even work where you wanted to work. And Sally Martin said, all of this amazing gospel music that we're making, why are we just allowing the sheet music to be given away to who, what, where, when, and why? So she was the brains that created order and the financial part of gospel music. Her business was called Martin and Morris Music Company. And that's one of the other gems in this book. It draws out all of these little things that no one knew. Did you know that, Alfred?
I did not know that.
Most people do not know that. And so she was a pioneer. And then fast forward to CeCe Winans, who just blew up at the Grammys again. And did, you know, CeCe Winans is on fire. You know, Tamala Mann is on fire. But no Sally, no CeCe, no Mahalia, no Yolanda. You see the connection? So that's what I mean by this is a living history. Yes. These beautiful sisters are still carrying the water that their mothers and grandmothers carried, and it wasn't easy for them. So the business of gospel music that both of you so eloquently articulated at the top of your show is still critical now, but these women made it happen.
This is so refreshing. It is so refreshing, really, and to feel and to hear your power and your passion. I'm just super, super, uber grateful. So,
you know, it hits me just now as we're talking about the legacy, and I didn't think about this till just now, and maybe this is something for us all to explore. Who's coming up after Yolanda and Tamala?
Right.
And if we don't celebrate this legacy, who's going to be inspired to say, y'all can go be the next Beyonce, y'all can be the next Jennifer Hudson, but I want to be the next Yolanda Adams or Mahalia Jackson. And if we don't, so I want to talk to you a little bit about the role of legacy, not only to document what already happened, but to inspire and direct what will happen in the future.
Yeah, and
they wouldn't know to attach it. They wouldn't.
Exactly.
In fact, there's a conversation happening right now about things like appropriation and what I call in our community, I call it black on black crime. And that would be if I'm sampling, right? If I'm sampling from Mahalia. Now that's so far back, but I do think that there is a window of opportunity to speak to this from that context, even in terms of the need. Because right now, you know, we're in a season of course correcting. Like we have a window of opportunity to be bold and unapologetic about this. So yes, so I'd love to hear that as well, Cheryl. Yeah, no,
I agree with both of you. And do you remember when hip hop got a hold of Shirley Caesar's song No Charge, when she's doing that was her old song that they just sped up, threw a hip hop track under. There were so many people that didn't even know that was Shirley Caesar. And then some, like one of her grandsons, if I have this story correctly, said that's my grandma, did an interview with her on social media, and everyone was like, oh, half the people didn't even know in the hip hop world who Shirley Caesar was. So that leads exactly to your point, the misappropriation. Now, what if she didn't have a grandson that could throw a camera in her face and go, hello, this is Shirley Caesar, that everyone's going crazy over this sample. So that's why the education of our own legacy is so important. And if we don't protect it, even stars as big, you said Beyonce transitions. If somebody doesn't protect her legacy, 50 years from now, believe it or not, some kid could say, who's Beyonce?
Yeah.
Like right now they're saying, who's Dinah Washington, who was one of the biggest stars ever in R&B history and the blues. So, you know, there are so many of our greats who are just disappearing. So we have to protect it. We have to make sure it's not appropriated for a different genre where they act like, oh, who was that person?
Yep.
So it's all in our hands. To your point, Dee, this is completely in our hands. And gospel music, and one of you said this earlier, is the bedrock for every music form that people are listening to. And I don't care what it is, if it's hip hop, jazz, blues, R&B, country music, whatever. It started with Black folks in the field working, singing their hearts out. It's called spirituals, and that spirituals gave way to gospel, which birthed rock and roll in every music form you hear today. So we need to honor our mothers and fathers from these humble beginnings who created great music that the entire world has built off of.
And it's the only music form that's originated.
Original, that's right.
It's the original American music from all other American music, and of course now globally impacted.
That's right.
It wasn't something that was imported from another country.
That's right. It's created right here by our ancestors.
Listen, we obviously want people to buy this book. We made that case. I'm sure it's widely available. But Cheryl, in the time that we have left in this last segment, you know, what do you want our audience to really carry away from this, both in terms of thought and in terms of action? As listeners of the show, as people of faith, and faith is about action, not just feelings and words.
That's right. Faith without actions is dead, right? So honor these women. Give this book as a gift to your mother, your grandmother, your grandfathers, all of the people who appreciate gospel music. This is sacred music. And these women poured their hearts and soul. People used to offer Mahalia Jackson millions of dollars to sing the blues. And she said, never will I do it. Never will I sell my soul. Many did. She refused. And so we need to say thank you to Mahalia. This is her story. This is her story. And this is her song. And all of the women in this book are representative of amazing women who did amazing things. So it's our time to say thank you.
Ooh, and thank you, Cheryl. That is a word. You guys, you're listening to Be Lifted Up, your guide to living an abundant life. I know he shares the same sentiment. We are just so blessed and grateful that you're here with us and this great work. We're obviously going to support this in every way we can think of. Just thank you for being on the show, Cheryl.
It's my honor to be with both of you. I'm a big fan, and thank you for the time, sincerely.
And that's our show for today. That was Cheryl Wills. She is an author and Emmy Award-winning news anchor. If you are in the New York metro area, the name of the book is Isn't Her Grace Amazing? The Women Who Changed Gospel Music. And you can buy the book on Amazon right now. And I really want to encourage all of us to purchase the book. Go to Amazon and buy the book, leave her a review. And I know that our ancestors, our late greats and their families I know they will be encouraged to know that these women are not forgotten. And I know that it will encourage and bless Cheryl's heart to know that we care. And so what a show. She's such an amazing spirit. She's so sweet.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Amazing, powerful. Just like you said, an amazing spirit. That really sums it up. And I'm going to echo you. And when I say, when Dee says buy the book now, the emphasis is on now. Now, I just know for myself, you could just pull out your phone right now, hit the Amazon app, order a book or two. I mean, this is something that's really worth doing, and we need to make this happen. So I'm really, really appreciative of having her on the show. Listen, you're listening to Be Lifted Up, your guide to living an abundant life. You can follow us on all social platforms at Be Lifted Up Radio. You can listen to this show and the past installments of the show at beliftedupradio.com. I'm here, Alfred Edmond Jr. with DC Marshall. We are so glad you didn't miss this one, but you shouldn't miss any of them. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.